So, think about this. For almost all of the last 2 million years, you wouldn't have been the only human species around.
Yeah,
It's a strange thought, isn't it?
it really is.
As recently as, 10,000 years ago, there were at least 6 different kinds of humans sharing this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And Yuval Noah Harari points out that our current situation, where Homo sapiens is the sole survivor, that's actually the anomaly.
That's the weird part. Yeah, it completely challenges our assumptions about human evolution.
Right.
We tend to imagine this sort of straightforward line of progress, one species neatly replacing the next, and then, ta-da, us.
Yeah, culminating in us. But the evidence, it suggests a much more crowded, complex picture.
A time when different Homo species were bumping into each other, living side by side.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're tackling Harari's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind.
It's a big one.
It is. Our goal is really to uncover the most thought-provoking and maybe unexpected aspects of what made us, Homo sapiens, distinct.
And those major shifts, right, up to the scientific revolution.
Yeah, the big turning points. The material we're looking at, it covers this vast timeline from early Homo species right through the beginnings of agriculture and, well, beyond that too.
We really want to get to the core of what shaped our journey.
And considering this multi-species past, it just forces you to rethink what human even means, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The fact we shared the planet for so long, it raises these pretty profound questions about our identity, our place.
Okay, let's start with something fundamental. Our brains.
The big ones.
They are enormous compared to other animals, like a typical mammal our size. Brain around 200 cubic centimeters.
Tiny.
Early humans, maybe 2.5 million years ago? Closer to 600.
Okay, bigger.
And modern sapiens were averaging, 1,200 to 1,400 cc.
Huge jump.
Neanderthals even had slightly larger brains, interestingly.
Right, which adds another layer.
So the question is, why did only the Homo lineage develop these massive brains? It seems almost counterintuitive.
Yeah, you'd think if bigger brains were just inherently better, evolution would favor them more often. You'd see, I don't know.
Philosophical foxes. Highly intelligent squirrels calculating nut trajectory.
Exactly. But we don't, so there's a cost.
A huge cost. Brain tissue is incredibly energy hungry.
So for evolution to go down that path for Homo, there must have been some really strong selective pressures. A massive advantage outweighing that cost.
And that advantage seems to be our rapid climb up the food chain.
Right, but not gradual like lions or sharks.
No. Their dominance evolved over millions of years. We got there. Boom. Almost overnight, evolutionarily speaking.
Which leads to Harari's analogy.
The banana republic dictator analogy, I love that. It suggests we haven't had that deep evolutionary time at the top to sort of settle in, develop stability.
Instead, we're maybe plagued by anxieties, fears.
Yeah, which maybe contributes to our capacity for cruelty, the scale of conflict, the environmental impact.
It makes you wonder if that hasty jump left us kind of fundamentally insecure at the top.
It's a really powerful idea. This rapid ascent created this unique situation. Neither we nor the environment really had time to fully adjust.
That imbalance could be a key factor underlying so many of the challenges we've faced.
Another potential factor in brain growth. Cooking.
The cooking hypothesis.
Some researchers see this direct link. We start cooking, our guts get shorter because digestion is easier.
And that frees up energy.
Exactly. Both big brains and long intestines are super expensive energy-wise.
So pre-digesting food externally with fire, that drastically cuts the energy needed for digestion.
Leaving more resources available for
the hungry brain. It provides a really plausible mechanism for that energy reallocation.
Okay, so we have these big brains. Now, what did that mean when we met other human species?
Right, because we did meet them.
The text mentions interbreeding, sapiens with Neanderthals, with Denisovans. It wasn't like we were totally separate.
And producing fertile offspring, potentially, which blurs the lines even more.
So why did they disappear? If we could mix, why are we the only ones left?
Well, the main theory is Homo sapiens just had a competitive edge.
Better hunters, gatherers.
Probably.
Yeah.
Likely better technology, maybe more complex social skills.
Yeah.
It all adds up to outcompeting them for resources.
You can picture it, right? A band of sapiens moves into a valley where Neanderthals live. Maybe we're just slightly better at finding the animals or knowing which plants are best.
Doesn't have to be dramatic conflict initially.
Yeah, over time, even a small advantage means the sapiens population grows, the Neanderthal one struggles, and eventually fades.
That subtle but persistent edge in just getting food, finding shelter. It leads to a demographic shift. We thrive, they decline.
And a massive part of that edge seems to be our language.
Harari calls it amazingly supple.
Yeah, it's not just wording calls. A green monkey can shout, leopard, right?
Useful?
Limited, though. But we can say, hey, this morning down by the river bend, I saw a lion. It was stalking some bison near that big rock. We should probably avoid that path later.
That level of detail, specificity, it allows for incredible planning, cooperation.
Coordinating hunts, defenses, sharing knowledge over generations.
It's not just a simple signal. It's rich information you could discuss, analyze, strategize about. A total game changer.
But it's not just about practical stuff, is it? It's also about abstract things.
Things that aren't physically there.
Exactly, like that Lion Man figurine from Germany, tens of thousands of years old.
Human body, lion head.
It's one of the earliest clear examples of art, probably religion or myth. This ability to imagine, to believe in things that don't objectively exist, that seems uniquely sapiens.
And that capacity for abstract thought, for shared stories, that's revolutionary. It lets us build bonds beyond just family.
It's the foundation for large-scale cooperation.
And the sheer amount of social information we juggle is wild.
Get this. In a group of just 50 people, there are 12,225 possible one-on-one relationships to track.
Wow. All social animals manage relationships, but we took it to a whole new level.
And maintaining that dense web takes serious brain power.
But our shared stories, our myths, our beliefs, they create a kind of shortcut, a framework for understanding all those connections through shared rules and expectations.
And here's where it gets really wild. Harari argues our modern institutions, corporations, nations, they run on the exact same principle.
Shared fictions.
Take Peugeot, the car company. It's a legal fiction.
Right. It doesn't physically exist in the same way a car does.
You could fire every employee, sell every factory. The company, Peugeot, as a legal entity, would still exist on paper.
It can own things, sue people, pay taxes.
Even though it's just an idea we all agree on, it's purely in our collective imagination.
And these shared fictions have incredibly real-world power. They shape everything.
Think about limited liability companies. A huge innovation.
Before that, starting a business was incredibly risky personally.
If your bakery failed, creditors could take your house, everything you owned.
Made people very cautious about taking risks, starting new things.
But limited liability, this collective agreement to separate the business's debts from the owner's personal assets, it changed everything.
It massively encouraged entrepreneurship, innovation, fueled economic growth by lowering the personal stakes.
So this unique human ability for imagination, for collective belief in things that aren't physically real, it allowed two huge things: cooperating in massive numbers and innovating socially really fast.
Which brings us neatly to the cognitive revolution.
Right. Harari sees this as the point where history kind of declares independence from biology as the main way to explain human development.
Before that, it's mostly about genetic changes, biological evolution.
But after the cognitive revolution, you have to look at history, at ideas, myths, cultures to understand why sapiens developed the way we did.
Biology obviously still matters. We're still animals.
But the big differences between us and, say, chimps, especially when you look at groups larger than maybe 150.
That's where the mythical glue comes in.
Yeah, those shared stories, those imagined realities that hold together thousands, millions of people in complex patterns, trade networks, religious celebrations, nations.
Below that Dunbar number, maybe you can manage with personal relationships. Above it, you need myth.
Okay, let's rewind a bit. Life before agriculture, those forager bands.
The evidence is tricky. Mostly stone tools, some bones.
Harari even suggests calling it the Wood Age, not the Stone Age, because most tools were probably wood and just didn't survive.
Right, so reconstructing their social lives, it involves a lot of speculation. Was it all communal living? Strict monogamy? We don't really know for sure.
One thing we do see evidence for is that early, deep bond with dogs.
Maybe 15,000 years back, possibly more.
And there are hints of dogs being buried ceremonially. Suggests a real emotional connection, doesn't it?
Definitely. That human-dog partnership is ancient and pretty unique. Coevolution in action.
Inside those forager bands, life was probably super intense, socially.
You knew everyone. Everyone knew you, your whole life.
Solitude, privacy, probably very rare commodities.
And bands likely interacted, sometimes fighting, sometimes trading, sharing mates, hunting together, forming alliances.
Sharing culture, too, right?
Right.
Language, myths. eventually leading to larger tribal identities.
That social fabric would have been incredibly dense.
Yeah.
Constant interaction, total reliance on each other.
Now, here's that surprising idea. Some call them the original affluent society.
Based on archaeological evidence suggesting varied diets, maybe shorter working weeks than early farmers.
Fewer infectious diseases, too, because they weren't living crammed together with livestock.
But, and this is crucial, Harari balances that view. It wasn't paradise.
No. High infant mortality was almost certain. Constant threat of starvation, accidents, violence.
And potentially harsh social norms within the band, abandoning the elderly or sick, maybe even infanticide. The Aceh examples are sobering.
Right. We have to avoid romanticizing it. It was likely a tough existence, even with some advantages.
And understanding their beliefs, even harder.
Animism seems likely. The idea that everything rocks, rivers, trees, animals has awareness, spirits, can interact with humans.
A totally different way of seeing the world, much more interconnected.
But the specifics, which spirits mattered, what were their rituals, what stories did they tell around the campfire, mostly lost.
That's the tragedy of prehistory. The silence of the narratives.
And their social structure. Were they hierarchical like chimps? Or more egalitarian like bonobos?
Again, we can only guess. Maybe both existed, maybe it varied hugely.
Those handprints in the Argentinian cave? Or that incredible burial of children in Russia?
Thousands of mammoth ivory beads, fox teeth, the labor involved.
It hints at complex rituals, beliefs, maybe social status. But it doesn't give us a clear picture of daily politics.
The takeaway is probably that there was a wide range of possibilities. Human societies were likely diverse even back then.
And despite this curtain of silence about specific events, like what exactly happened when sapiens first met Neanderthals?
We just don't have that level of detail.
But we do know foragers had a big impact on their environment. That idea of pristine wilderness before farming, mostly a myth.
They used fire extensively to shape landscapes, encourage certain plants or animals.
And the first really major ecological impact, the extinction of the Australian megafauna, around 45,000 years ago.
Yeah, the evidence points strongly towards human arrival being the main driver, not just climate change.
Why? Because it primarily hit large land animals, not marine life so much. And you see similar extinction patterns when sapiens arrive elsewhere, like New Zealand with the Maori and the moa birds.
It seems to be a recurring theme. Sapiens arrive, giant animals disappear, our first big footprint.
Okay, fast forward tens of thousands of years. The agricultural revolution, around 10,000 years ago.
The big shift from foraging to farming.
Focusing intensely on manipulating just a few plants and animals.
But Harari calls it history's biggest fraud.
Yeah, arguing that for the average person it meant harder work, longer hours, and actually a worse diet than foragers had. Less varied, more prone to deficiencies.
It's a really provocative perspective, challenging that standard narrative of agriculture as pure progress.
And he flips it around. Maybe we didn't domesticate wheat.
Maybe we domesticated us.
Think about it from wheat's point of view. 10,000 years ago, just a wild grass in one small region.
Now, it covers more of the planet than almost any other plant. Huge evolutionary success.
Because we cleared forests for it, carried its seeds everywhere, protected it, watered it, dedicated our lives to it.
Wheat offered a stable food source, maybe, but not necessarily a better one, and it tied us down.
Right. What did we get in return for all that back-breaking labor?
Not a richer diet. Grains are okay, but lack many nutrients. Hard to digest sometimes.
Not security either. Relying on one or two crops makes you incredibly vulnerable. One bad harvest, one disease.
And you face famine. Foragers had more options if one food source failed.
Animal domestication, similar story.
We bred them for submissiveness, docility. Think sheep, cows.
Great for the species in terms of numbers. They spread everywhere with us.
For the individual animal.
Yeah.
Often a life of confinement, stress, early death. Harari uses the veal calf example kept in a tiny box.
Evolutionary success, but individual misery. It's a stark paradox. He argues the agricultural revolution was a catastrophe for most domesticated animals.
And for humans, more anxiety, worrying about weather, pests, raids, and way more hard physical labor.
And all that surplus food didn't necessarily make the average farmer better off.
No, it mostly fueled population growth and supported elites, kings, priests, soldiers who lived off the farmer's surplus, leaving them just enough to get by.
So how did these large agricultural societies, with all their internal stresses and inequalities, actually hold together?
Through imagined orders, shared myths, laws, social hierarchies.
Like Hammurabi's code in ancient Babylon.
claimed divine origin from the gods.
And it explicitly divided society. Superior people, commoners, slaves, each with different rights, different monetary values assigned to them in law.
It creates order, but it's based entirely on a shared belief in that divinely ordained hierarchy. It's not objectively real.
Harari does this brilliant thing where he translates the U.S. Declaration of Independence into biological terms.
Right, to show that equality isn't a biological fact. Evolution is about difference, not uniformity.
All men are created equal biologically. That's meaningless. But as an imagined order, as a shared belief, it allows millions of strangers to cooperate effectively.
Even if the belief itself isn't objectively true, Hammurabi believed hierarchy was essential for order. Jefferson believed equality was. Both systems worked because people believed in them.
But belief isn't always enough. These orders need enforcement too.
Violence, or the threat of it. Armies, police.
And true believers, Harari quotes Talleyrand, you can do anything with bayonets except sit on them.
You need people to genuinely accept the order. Priests, teachers, propagandists, they're often more effective than soldiers in the long run.
He distinguishes between objective reality, like radioactivity, subjective reality, your personal feelings, and intersubjective reality.
Things that exist only because we collectively believe they do.
Like money, the US dollar, human rights, France.
These aren't tangible objects, nor just personal opinions. They exist in the shared consciousness of millions, woven into laws, institutions, stories.
And changing them is incredibly hard. You can't just decide the dollar is worthless. You need to change the beliefs of billions, dismantle complex organizations, offer a compelling alternative myth.
Unlike ants or bees, whose social order is basically hardwired in their DNA.
We need that mythical glue to cooperate in large numbers.
Now, running these large societies, these empires, generates masses of data.
Laws, taxes, property records, census data, way too much for individual human brains to handle reliably.
Brains have limited capacity, people die and take knowledge with them, and processing is slow.
So we invented writing.
Initially, mostly partial scripts, just for numbers and lists, tally marks, early accounting.
Then full scripts like cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs in Egypt, capable of representing spoken language.
And yes, eventually literature, poetry, history emerged.
But the primary driver, the main use for centuries, storing bureaucratic data. Tax registries were far more common than epic poems.
He mentions the Mari archive from nearly 4,000 years ago. Imagine trying to find one specific clay tablet about a dispute over a wheat field among thousands.
Information storage was one thing. Efficient retrieval was another challenge entirely.
And these imagined orders, they profoundly shape how societies actually work, even when they seem contradictory.
Like the Declaration of Independence proclaiming equality while its authors owned slaves.
Their imagined order included a racial hierarchy that overrode the principle of equality for certain groups. Equality meant equal application of laws within that existing hierarchy.
It wasn't about leveling the social or economic playing field. The American order also upheld the hierarchy of wealth.
And even natural talents get filtered through these imagined hierarchies.
You might be brilliant, but if the social system doesn't give you opportunities, think Harry Potter stuck under the stairs.
Your potential needs nurturing, and social position heavily influences who gets that nurturing.
Where do these hierarchies come from? Often historical accidents.
The Hindu caste system might have started with an ancient invasion, the invaders wanting to preserve their status.
But once established, these hierarchies get reinforced by laws, customs, religion, myths. They become deeply ingrained.
And they can persist even when reality seems to contradict them. Like racial prejudice in Alabama continuing despite changing economic circumstances. The belief in inferiority can be stronger than evidence.
Gender hierarchy is another big one. Patriarchy seems almost universal across vastly different cultures.
Embedded in laws, like ancient Near Eastern rape laws, focusing on property damage to the father or husband, not the woman's trauma.
But why is patriarchy so common? Harari says there's no single convincing biological explanation.
Theories about brute strength or different survival strategies, they all have holes. Counterexamples like elephants or bonobos show female leadership is possible.
It's a major historical puzzle, but what's clear is that all cultures seem to have internal contradictions.
Like the tension between liberty and equality in modern democracies.
And these contradictions, he argues, aren't necessarily weaknesses. They can be engines of creativity and change as societies try to reconcile conflicting values.
It drives dynamism.
Okay, so over millennia, these separate human worlds start connecting.
Empires expand, trade routes lengthen, religions spread.
By around 1450, maybe 90% of humanity lived within one vast interconnected zone, Afro-Eurasia.
A massive unification compared to 10,000 BC.
But that fundamental sapiens tendency, dividing the world into us and them,
Yeah.
that never really goes away.
No social animal, he points out, naturally acts in the interest of its entire species. Tribalism runs deep.
Money was a key lubricant in this unification process.
Think of the Aztecs being baffled by the Spaniards' obsession with gold. For the Aztecs, gold was pretty, but not universally exchangeable like cacao beans were in their system.
Barter has huge limitations. You need that double coincidence of wants.
I need apples, you need shoes, and we need to find each other and agree on an exchange rate. Very inefficient.
Money solves that. It's a universal medium. Convertible, storable, portable.
Even in extreme situations, like cigarettes in Auschwitz, something can become money if everyone believes it has value and accepts it in exchange. It's about shared trust.
The big leap was trusting money with no intrinsic value, like weighed silver in Mesopotamia, or later, coins and paper money.
Just trust in the system, in the authority issuing it.
But there's always been that tension with money, hasn't there? It enables amazing cooperation, builds trust between strangers.
But it's also seen as potentially corrupting, undermining traditional values, leading to greed.
It wasn't just money unifying the world, though. Military power steal was just as important.
Empires.
Yeah.
Defined by their flexible borders and seemingly limitless appetite for expansion.
The Romans absorbing diverse peoples, like the Numantians, imposing their culture.
Empires were crucial in knitting together different ethnic groups, different ecological zones, under one political roof, creating larger and larger segments of humanity, sharing a common political reality.
And they left huge cultural legacies. Language, think Chinese characters across East Asia, European languages in the Americas, Arabic in North Africa, identity like the Zulus in South Africa, whose identity was partly forged within the British Empire.
And empires almost always justified themselves by claiming to benefit all their inhabitants, bringing civilization, order, the true faith to so-called barbarians.
You see it with China, Rome, the Mauryan Empire, Muslim caliphates, European colonial empires, the Soviets, even arguably modern American influence.
It's a recurring imperial narrative.
Even decolonization involved adopting huge chunks of the former colonizers' culture, their languages, political models, ideas like human rights and self-determination.
So while the world map shows more independent countries now, their actual independence is often constrained by global forces, markets, international organizations, global opinion, political fragmentation alongside increasing cultural and economic integration.
And religion often went hand in hand with empires and trade.
Those medieval Silk Road markets, Kublai Khan's diverse armies, they were connected by commerce, by imperial power, and often by shared or tolerated universal religions.
Now, about religion, Westerners often stereotype polytheism as primitive idolatry.
But Harari explains the internal logic. Multiple gods governing different domains, often under some supreme, maybe distant power or fate. Think Greek or Hindu pantheons.
And the Romans were generally tolerant. Worship whomever you like, just add the emperor and Roman gods to the list as a sign of political loyalty.
Except the Christians. Their monotheism was exclusive and evangelizing.
Yeah.
Refusing to honor Roman gods looked like treason.
Ironically, though, polytheistic Rome probably killed relatively few Christians compared to the number of Christians killed by other Christians later in disputes over doctrine. St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, for instance.
Christianity and Islam became hugely successful models of universal, monotheistic missionary religions.
But monotheism has its own theological problem, the problem of evil. If God is all good and all powerful, why does suffering exist?
Polytheism doesn't have this issue as much. Gods can be flawed, conflict with each other. Dualism, like Zoroastrianism, solves it by positing two opposing powers, good and evil.
But attributing evil directly to an omnipotent good God, historically rare. Then you get something different like Buddhism, not focused on a god, but on natural law, the law of suffering caused by craving.
Siddhartha Gautama's path to enlightenment, understanding suffering, and achieving nirvana, release from craving.
Though in practice, most Buddhists historically still worshipped various gods alongside Buddhist principles.
Harari defines religion broadly. Any system of human norms and values based on belief in a superhuman order, distinct from, say, science or football rules.
And this definition includes modern humanist religions.
Liberal humanism, valuing individual liberty, socialist humanism, valuing collective equality, and evolutionary humanism.
Liberalism owes a lot to monotheistic ideas about the individual soul. Socialism focuses on the collective species, Homo sapiens.
Evolutionary humanism. Well, that's historically led to dark places, like Nazism and its racial theories trying to improve humanity through selective breeding and elimination. That Mein Kampf quote is chilling.
And now we see echoes of it in
There's also the theory of culture as a kind of mental infection, or meme. Ideas spreading because they're good at replicating themselves, sometimes regardless of their effect on human hosts.
like belief in an afterlife paradise or a communist utopia, powerful ideas that motivate people, sometimes towards great sacrifice, benefiting the ideas spread more than the individual's well-being.
The key takeaway is that history doesn't necessarily move towards what's best for humans. The fittest cultures aren't always the kindest. It's a contingent path.
And around 1500 AD, a major contingent turn happened. The scientific revolution took off in Western Europe, a region that wasn't previously a global powerhouse.
A massive shift. Harari uses the Rip Van Winkle analogy.
Right. A peasant from 1000 AD waking in 1500. Things would be different, but largely recognizable. A sailor from Columbus's time waking up today. Mind blown. Utterly incomprehensible world.
The sheer acceleration of change in human capabilities is staggering. Circumnavigating the globe went from impossible to fictional adventure to routine flight in just a few centuries.
What defined this new modern science? 3 key things, Harari says.
1. Willingness to admit ignorance. We don't know everything. A huge departure from older traditions claiming complete knowledge.
2. Centrality of observation in mathematics. Knowledge has to be based on empirical evidence and expressed in mathematical language where possible.
And 3. Acquisition of new powers. The goal isn't just understanding, it's using that understanding to develop new technologies, gain new abilities.
The scientific dogma is basically no dogma except the core methods. Observe, use math, test. New evidence trumps old tradition. Every time.
Mathematics became crucial. Not just Newton's physics, but later, statistics for dealing with complex systems.
That example of the Scottish minister's Widows Fund is brilliant.
Webster and Wallace using birth-death records to calculate life expectancy, probability of widowhood, number of orphans.
And using those statistics to set up the first viable, large-scale insurance fund, applying math to predict and manage human affairs.
But the link between pure science and practical technology, that's actually quite recent.
For centuries, science was mostly philosophy. Technology was craft. They didn't connect much until the 19th century, really.
World War I massively accelerated that connection. Science, industry, military, suddenly locked together, pushing for wonder weapons.
And that fusion truly took off with capitalism and the Industrial Revolution driving the need for new inventions and efficiencies.
Before the scientific revolution, the dominant idea was often looking back to a past golden age.
Now, the dominant idea is progress. Belief that new knowledge and technology will inevitably lead to a better future, solving problems like poverty, disease, war.
And in some areas, like reducing biological poverty, basic starvation, and malnutrition, there's been undeniable progress in many parts of the world.
But the ultimate expression of this belief in progress through science, Harari calls it the Gilgamesh Project.
The ancient king who sought immortality. Now, it's modern science trying to defeat death itself.
For most of history, death was accepted. Sad, yes, but inevitable, natural, often given meaning by religion.
Now, it's increasingly seen as a technical problem to be solved.
Think how recent basic medical breakthroughs are. Understanding infection, anesthesia, transformational, but very new.
Even royalty suffered terribly. Eleanor of Castile, wife of Edward I of England, had maybe 16 children, only 6 survived childhood. That was normal.
Today, the outlook for the Gilgamesh Project seems, well, optimistic to some. Genetic engineering extending lifespans in worms, maybe humans soon. Nanotechnology creating tiny robots to repair cells.
Some futurists talk seriously about achieving immortality, not being immortal, but dying only from accidents, not old age, maybe by 2050. It sounds like sci-fi, but the research is happening.
But who decides which science gets done? Progress isn't neutral.
It's heavily influenced by funding. Governments, businesses, donors, they have agendas.
Nuclear physics got massive funding because of military potential.
Right.
Underwater archaeology studying ancient shipwrecks, much less funding.
Even scientists just driven by curiosity often end up working on problems defined by those funding priorities.
And choosing what pure science to fund still requires non-scientific value judgments. Limited resources mean making choices.
Like the fictional example. Should we fund Professor Slughorn studying cow udder diseases? Clear economic benefit. Or Professor Sprout studying cow psychology? The economic argument usually wins, even if it's framed scientifically, like linking cow depression to lower milk yields. Politics and economics steer the ship.
Which brings us to science and empire, deeply intertwined.
Captain Cook's voyages, perfect example.
Funded partly by the Scientific Royal Society, but the ship, the crew, the guns, provided by the Royal Navy, clear imperial goals alongside the science.
The scientific discoveries mapping coastlines, finding longitude, treating scurvy were hugely valuable militarily and politically.
And Cook claimed territories like Australia for Britain, leading directly to colonization and disaster for indigenous people, science-serving empire.
European empires used science and technology relentlessly for global dominance. That military-industrial scientific complex, machine guns, steamships, telegraphs.
But they also often invested heavily in understanding their empires.
Studying local languages, linguistics, cultures, anthropology, geography, botany. Think William Jones deciphering Sanskrit links or Henry Rawlinson cracking cuneiform. This knowledge gave them practical advantages in ruling vast, diverse populations and exploiting resources effectively.
This scientific imperial mindset was arguably less developed in, say, China or the Ottoman Empire during that crucial 1500-1950 period.
What fueled the European mentality of conquest, Harari suggests it was partly that admission of ignorance. There are things we don't know out there.
Think of those old European maps after 1492, with big blank spaces labeled unknown. Acknowledging ignorance spurred exploration. Compare that to maps from other cultures that often depicted the known world as complete.
Columbus himself seriously miscalculated the Earth's size but sailed anyway, driven by a mix of faith and flawed data. That willingness to venture into the unknown, expecting discovery, was key.
And when they arrived, like the Spanish in the Americas, superior technology, ships, guns, steel, horses, combined with this different mindset, allowed tiny groups to conquer huge empires.
Deciphering ancient scripts like the Behistun inscription wasn't just academic curiosity. It gave access to the history and power structures of past empires, useful knowledge for present ones.
Knowing the languages, social divisions, and beliefs of conquered peoples, like the British studying India, made governance and exploitation much easier.
And you still see echoes today, right? Scientific-sounding arguments about cultural differences used in debates about immigration or foreign policy. The link between knowledge and power is persistent.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the engine driving much of this, capitalism.
Harari uses that great bakery example. Mrs. McDonut wants to expand.
Needs a loan from Mr. Greedy the banker, who then needs Stone the contractor. It shows how credit works, how banks create money based on trust in the future.
The total money circulating in accounts can be way more than the actual physical cash in the vault. It's built on confidence that the bakery will succeed and repay the loan with profit.
Why was credit so limited before the modern era?
Largely, a lack of trust in the future. People generally believe the total amount of wealth was fixed, or even shrinking. A zero-sum game.
If I got rich, it must be because I took from someone else, or maybe from God. Lending money at interest was often seen as sinful.
Then came Adam Smith with his revolutionary idea in The Wealth of Nations.
The economy isn't a fixed pie, it can grow. My pursuit of profit, by investing and creating more goods or services, can actually benefit everyone by increasing the total wealth available. A win-win situation.
This became the core of the capitalist ethic. Profit is good. Reinvesting profits to generate more profit is even better. That drives economic growth, which is seen as the supreme good, the foundation for everything else: justice, freedom, happiness.
The Dutch revolt against Spain is an early example of credit power.
The Dutch were reliable borrowers, paid their debt, secured trust. Spain kept defaulting, eroding trust.
That financial credibility allowed the small Dutch Republic to fund its war effort and build a global trading empire. Money as a weapon.
And it led to powerful corporations like the Dutch East India Company, VOC, given quasi-governmental powers.
They could wage war, sign treaties, colonize, all in the pursuit of profit for their shareholders. Think of their brutal conquest of the Indonesian Spice Islands.
The Dutch West India Company helped establish New Amsterdam, now New York. Wall Street's origins are tangled up in this history.
Even war itself became financeable. The Greek rebellion against the Ottomans, partly funded by bonds sold to idealistic or speculative British investors, finance shaping geopolitics. Then came the Industrial Revolution, pouring fuel on the capitalist fire.
A revolution in energy, fundamentally. Before that, almost all energy came from plants: wood, muscle power, human animal, wind, and water. Limited.
Converting heat into movement was inefficient. Think gunpowder and cannons, a brief burst, that's it.
Then, the steam engine. Suddenly, a way to reliably convert heat from burning coal into continuous motion. Game changer.
Followed by internal combustion engines, electricity, unlocking vast new energy sources like oil, and new materials, rubber, plastics, aluminum.
This powered revolutions in transport, steamships, trains, and communication, telegraph, telephone, shrinking the world dramatically.
It also drove a second agricultural revolution.
Industrial technologies applied to farming, tractors, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, food production soared again.
But it also industrialized agriculture, pushing people off the land and, again, having huge impacts on animals.
Harari emphasizes the disconnect. Meeting animals' objective needs, food, water, while completely ignoring their subjective needs, social bonds, freedom of movement, the calf in the tiny cage again.
Alongside industrial production came industrial consumption, consumerism.
The ideology that buying more goods and services is good, that it's the path to happiness, a stark contrast to traditional ethics of frugality.
He quotes that Israeli cereal ad, "Tell us what you buy and we'll tell you who you are. Consumption as identity."
And a modern division of labor and consumption. The rich focus on investing their capital, the less wealthy are encouraged to consume, keep the wheels turning.
Industry also reshaped our sense of time.
Factories needed synchronized schedules. Railways demanded standardized time across regions. Before that, time was local, based on the sun.
The adoption of Greenwich Mean Time, timetables, clocks everywhere. Modern life became dictated by the clock, detached from natural rhythms, and the Industrial Revolution accelerated the decline of traditional family and community ties.
For millennia, family and local community were everything: your economic support, healthcare, social life, security.
Now, the state and the market increasingly took over those functions, providing schools, hospitals, pensions, jobs, entertainment.
Losing your family or community in the past could be fatal. Now, the state and market offer alternatives, albeit impersonal ones.
But this leaves a void. Humans crave belonging.
So new imagined communities arise to fill that gap. The nation, passionately identifying with millions of strangers you'll never meet, and consumer tribes bonding over shared brands and lifestyles.
So this brave new modern world, has it actually made us more peaceful, happier?
While social orders seem less rigid now, revolutions happen much faster, but overall violence.
It's complex. States can be incredibly violent, obviously. But Harari argues state-run systems, even authoritarian ones, might provide more day-to-day security for the average person than the constant, smaller-scale violence common in many pre-state societies.
His example: you were probably safer from random violence in Pinochet's Chile than among some Amazonian tribes with high rates of internal conflict. Controversial, but thought-provoking.
And since 1945, we've seen the Pax Atomica. Major powers have largely stopped trying to conquer each other, a massive historical shift. War is less profitable, more destructive than ever.
But we need perspective, right? These improvements are recent. Think of the horrors of the world wars, the Holocaust, the famines caused by political regimes.
And the immense suffering inflicted on animals through industrial agriculture continues unabated. It's not a simple story of progress.
And happiness. Does more wealth, better health, longer life automatically equal more happiness?
Philosophers, religious figures for millennia have said no. Social connection, meaning, ethics, spirituality matter more.
Modern psychology tries to measure subjective well-being with questionnaires.
And they find correlations. Wealthier people tend to report being happier than poor people, people in democracies happier than those under tyranny, married people happier than singles.
But correlation isn't causation, and the effects aren't always huge. There seems to be a ceiling.
Plus, the hedonic treadmill idea. Happiness depends on expectations matching reality.
As conditions improve, our expectations rise just as fast. Clean water used to be a luxury. Now it's an expectation. Not having it makes you unhappy, but having it doesn't necessarily bring lasting joy.
Mass media, advertising. They might actually decrease contentment by constantly showing us things we don't have, raising expectations unrealistically. The teenager comparing themselves to airbrushed models.
Even immortality might not bring happiness if it creates new anxieties, boredom, or inequality if only some can afford it.
Then there's the biological view of happiness.
Maybe it's mostly about biochemistry. Pleasant sensations triggered by serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin.
Our fundamental biochemical systems might not have changed much since the Stone Age. History just changes the triggers.
A medieval peasant might have felt a surge of serotonin from a good harvest. A modern banker gets it from a stock market gain. Same basic biochemical reaction, perhaps.
Liberalism tends to trust our subjective feelings as the guide to happiness. If it feels good, do it.
Buddhism offers a radically different view. True happiness isn't about chasing pleasant feelings or external conditions. It's about understanding your true nature, realizing feelings are fleeting, and achieving inner peace independent of them, not identifying with the emotion.
So where are we heading? The future of Homo sapiens.
Genetic engineering is moving fast. We can already tweak lifespans in worms, create genius mice.
Engineering human traits, intelligence, empathy, lifespan, even social behaviors like trying to make voles monogamous. The potential is huge and ethically terrifying.
Then there's cyborg engineering, blurring the lines between organic and inorganic.
Bionic limbs controlled by thought exist now. What about brain-computer interfaces, enhanced senses, abilities, desires, even identity could be transformed?
Raises massive legal and ethical issues, too. DNA privacy, insurance discrimination, employment, patenting life itself.
Looking really long-term, Harari speculates that Homo sapiens might eventually replace itself with something else, being so different, maybe godlike from our perspective that we couldn't comprehend them.
His analogy, trying to explain Hamlet to a Neanderthal. The gap might become that vast.
The Frankenstein myth looms large here, doesn't it? The fear of creating something we can't control, something that destroys us.
And importantly, these future gods, if they emerge, will initially be shaped by our current cultural ideas, capitalism, nationalism, religious beliefs, whatever dominates now. We're setting the initial conditions.
Bioethics tries to draw lines, say what's forbidden, but Harari is skeptical about stopping progress.
Especially something like the Gilgamesh Project. The drive to cure disease, save lives, alleviate suffering is so powerful, it seems almost unstoppable, even if it leads us into unknown territory.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah, all this power, this mastery over the planet. Yet Harari suggests Homo sapiens so far hasn't produced much to be truly proud of. We've often caused immense suffering, especially to other animals.
We've made recent progress reducing human suffering from famine, plague, war.
But those gains feel fragile. And the situation for most other animals seems to be getting worse, not better.
It leaves us with that final, really challenging question for you, the listener, to ponder. Building on this future tech, what kind of gods might we inadvertently create? And what values, what parts of our messy human nature will they inherit from us?
What does our current path suggest about the long-term future? Not just for us, but for all life shaped by our actions.
Makes you think.